This is interesting. My camera usually is working, and I don't know why I can't see myself, but that is fine. I will continue. So, I want to get to the bottom of Daniel's 70 weeks, and I have tried to tackle this even recently, especially dealing with Don Preston's outtake, how he will think it points to Christ, as does Martin Luther. That at the end of the 70 weeks, you'll have the Messiah. And here I am in Martin Luther's works on Zechariah. And as I found it very interesting what he's saying about these weeks. And it says, in order to understand, and um, I'm not really dealing with the weeks just yet. What I'm doing just yet is trying to get us in the frame of mind of what was going on in the 6th century, let's say, and how uh, these 70 weeks are to be determined from when it was written, and a bunch of other things like that. So there's a lot of strong opinions on Daniel's 70 weeks. I just commented on some churches live stream, as the only comment, and the pastor said something. I was just like, no, it's not. From 441, as they say, some arbitrary time during the reign of Artaxerxes, the Nehemiah was sent to rebuild the city. And that seems to be the prevalent view nowadays, is this the point, when you do like 441 and you get to the time of Jesus, you somehow have 490. And I find that kind of like a bad understanding. And I guess it's part and parcel to just kind of ignore the 40 years, put a gap, because they'll say at the last verse of the prophecy, oh, the Messiah is cut off in the middle of the week after making the covenant, and then the city was destroyed. And a lot of them won't even talk about the city destroyed. But if you do, then you kind of have this 40-year gap between when they say things happen. And I would even think that things were a little sooner than the Bible might have us in our own heads thinking, that because Paul was talking in front of Agrippa after he had spent supposedly 14 years in the wilderness, but Agrippa died in 44. So that puts us back by 30. And Paul, I mean, he was persecuting Christians after some time had gone by. I don't think it was, that very same day he heard of the movement of just this. I wouldn't say it was just apostles. Of course, there's thousands of people, but there seems to be not too much of account of any of that. But nonetheless, here I'm trying to read Martin Luther talk about what he thinks, and also in the same book, there's a shorter version of what Luther had said about this in a Latin lecture he had given. But this is years later, and he's writing as much as he wants to write, and able to look up what he wants to look up as he writes. And it says here, in terms of the book of Zechariah, and maybe we should actually start from the book of Zechariah. So let me go to the book of Zechariah and actually know what it says before I try to interpret with Martin Luther what it's saying. So we're at the very beginning of the book, and it says that in the second year of Darius, and when I did the Don Preston video about preterism in 90 weeks, Mr. Preston was very faithful to the Bible. So if it says Jesus, makes these comments that like point to Daniel 9 quite obviously, then who am I to say, or even him or anybody otherwise? So I definitely commend him on that much. But when it comes to Zechariah, I had said, oh, look, he says here in the second year of Darius, and you can look at Ezra in different places where this second year of Darius seems to be really big. And I falsely, I think maybe even concluded that it was Darius the second because, you got this verse in Daniel where Daniel's talking to Darius, and then the way the Ezra 4 is written, which I'm going to get into in this video, kind of would make you conclude that, but I don't think that, so I would walk that back. I want to say that video is wrong because, I've made other videos about Daniel 9 and said, oh, I was wrong before. I mean, this is really difficult stuff. So I would take it for what it's worth if you do have the time to watch another video about Daniel 9. It's called Preterism and Preston on this channel. But Zechariah says, the warlord came with the prophet Zechariah, son of Berechiah. That's really important. And it says, the Lord was indeed angry with your fathers, and says unto them, the Lord of hosts, return to me, says the Lord of hosts, and I will return to you, says the Lord of hosts. Be not like your fathers, whom the former prophets warned. Thus says the Lord of hosts, turn from your evil ways and from your wicked deeds. But they would not listen or pay attention to me, says the Lord. Your fathers, where are they? Are the prophets? Can they live forever? But my words and decrees, which I entrusted to my servants, the prophets, did not overtake their fathers. Then they repented and admitted the Lord of hosts treat us according to his ways and deeds, just as he had determined he would. So it says again in the second year of Darius, then it says again, Berechiah, son of Edo. And this is he says, the angel of the Lord spoke out, O Lord of hosts, how long will we have most mercy for Jerusalem and the cities of Judah that have felt your anger these 70 years? So the captivity's over. And what is the captivity? Let's go really quick to Jeremiah. This was kind of like a time out of the land, an exile. And this would be Jeremiah, was it 25 or 29? 29 is... Okay, I think it was 25:11. Jeremiah 25:11. This whole land shall be a ruin and a desert. So Jeremiah says this about a lot of people's land, so this isn't special to them. 70 years, these nations shall be enslaved to the king of Babylon. So I think he probably already did the prophecies against the nations. But, I mean, even in our Bibles, hey, it's different than the Septuagint, so they do switch up the orders there. I think we should go back a verse or two. It says, I will bring them against the land, against the inhabitants, against the neighboring nations, against all these neighboring nations. So it's not special to just Jerusalem. I will do. So even like when Ezra comes back, Nehemiah, I mean, they got people from other nations of west of the Euphrates, east of the Euphrates. So they're people that, I don't know if you're a guy like Ezra, you know, you read a lot and you're not very physically fit. It might take you 4 months to walk from Babylon to Jerusalem, but I think that was what it was in the seventh year of Artaxerxes. They said, you know, seventh year of Artaxerxes, he left on the first month and he got there in the fifth month, I think it was. But uh, when these guys are it says, I was in Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, my servant, and he's doing damage against Israel, and not really Israel, more like Judah, let's say, because Israel had fallen long time before this. But it says the whole land. It says, among them I will bring an end, the song of joy and the song of gladness, and the voice of the bridegroom, the voice of the bride, and the lamp. So this is really about the temple, that because they had God's presence in the temple, so you know it was like a happy little family. So without that, you know, what do you really have? Um, you know, they say the presence never came back to the second temple. And I will punish the king of Babylon. So after 70 years, it has a lot to do with. It says this land shall be ruined, desolate 70 years. The nations shall be slaves to the king of Babylon. The 70 years have elapsed. So I mean, this has to do with a lot of nations. This is a kind of a world event, and it ends with the punishment of the king of the Chaldeans. So I know Isaiah will say Cyrus is the anointed one, and there's lots of dream weaving about kind of the the messianic temple, kind of, especially in Ezekiel. But this is kind of the judgment against the nations in general, as like kind of these cluster of nations. You know, there's the Arabs and the Ammonites and these groups that in Judges, like a lot of these later works, seem to be an annoyance, and Jeremiah probably has similar kind of people, Samaritans or what have you, and those are post-exilic kind of problems as we see in Ezra. But so yeah, there's no voice of the bride, but it's also not being in the land, and it's also the judgment on um, Babylon, the king on Babylon. So they say that history proves that Cyrus became the king of Babylon. That is, defeated the king of Babylon. I think it was the son or grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. He had fled into the wilderness, and so that's where you get these legends like, oh, he was sleeping outside where the dew can kind of settle on his body, the morning dew, and kind of live like an animal, because he actually had to run because Persia was getting so strong. I don't know if they unified with the Elamites and the Farsis or whatever they did. They got really strong, or stronger than before, and put up what is that word? Fortuitous for what do you call that? I don't know what the word is, but it was a fortuitous uh, defense against the Babylonians, and to where they actually took them over. And Cyrus the Great, he had taken over lots of nations, and the rest is history. So that's what Zechariah was saying. Like our ancestors didn't do right, so let's remember God, and He'll remember us, and we'll turn to Him, and He'll turn to us. So it's kind of this two-way street, and this is the second year of Darius, and this these this is the days of Haggai. I think Haggai had just started prophesying, and Ezra will say the great works that they were doing around this time period, Haggai and Zechariah, the prophets. And there's two kinds of anointing, I guess, in Exodus chapter 30 or so, maybe chapter 32. And one, I guess, is for the governor or king, maybe the prophet. I really don't know. And the other is for the priest. That's one I always knew is like the priest. So, anointed priest. And so Zechariah is going to have these kind of moments where, Joshua's before him and Zerubbabel. So Zerubbabel's got these eyes, maybe, I don't know. And I guess Joshua went before Satan. This isn't Joshua from like the book of Joshua I was talking earlier about. This is Joshua the high priest. I think it was son of Jehozadak. And we'll get into all that. I mean, there's like the crown and these angels, and oh yeah, I wanted to show you more thing with the angels. So this is a very significant moment because it's like the Lord of Hosts, and there's like lots going on, kind of flying bushel. I mean, it's very four chariots. I mean, there's a lot going on. It's very metaphysical. Like there's all these visions of these huge things happening at this time. Is that because it is a huge time because they had been out of the land for 70 years. The captivity's over, and here they are back in the land, and they're building the temple and everything. So I will turn. So it says here in Zechariah 1, it says, "Therefore the Lord will turn to Jerusalem in my mercy. My house shall be built, says the Lord of hosts, and a measuring line will stretch over Jerusalem." So I don't know why you'd want to kind of build up the gates, because what if you wanted to expand the area? You're kind of limiting in that way. But supposedly the Arabs were wanted to loot the place or something, so they couldn't, even though they had like tons of gold from Ezra and Zerubbabel and Shalbazar, Bashar, and all them. They had Shashbashar had whatever his name is, I don't remember, but they had a few migrations of people bringing tons of wealth from the decree of Darius and the decree of Cyrus and things like that. Ezra records, but they don't have any walls. They have tons of people there, and there are thousands of people that can build the walls. There's no town. There's no city. I think it comes from a false idea of what a building is. Like the temple, because especially for two of the walls of the temple, is on a cliff face. You're really not like building a roof. I mean, maybe a little bit of like you could put a roof that blocks the sunlight. That's all you need. But you wouldn't need like a substantial roof, because you don't get that much rain. And so you could have like tall poles that have long curtains or something like that about the sun, maybe. But building a city and building the temple, I kind of think they're the same things. You bring in stones in, and you're building kind of the shape of things. The border of the old city didn't even go to the Pool of Siloam. So I don't know why they didn't build. He said he's down by the Dung Gate. I don't know why he didn't see that. Oh, this was part of the old temple. I suppose there were walls left, but there weren't any gates, and somehow, oops, we forgot to include the tunnel of Sholom and Zion and everything. So the southeast corner of the city is just like a high cliff along the valleys of Kidron and the other valley, and anyway, so he says, my cities will again overflow with prosperity, and so he says about this measure line, but then it goes in this New Jerusalem. It says again, a man looked, and there was a man with a measuring line in his hand. He said, "Where are you going to measure Jerusalem?" He answers, and they reminisce of this in the book of Revelation. So he answered, "To go, see how great its width and how great its length, how long and wide is it?" And then the angel who spoke out with me advanced, and another angel came out to meet him and said to him, "Run and tell this young man, people will live in Jerusalem." So this is a contrary message. That's why he has to like interrupt. And so this is a man of a good omen. The rest, this has to do with the restoration of the priesthood somehow, I guess. But it says people will live in Jerusalem as though it an open country, because the multitude of men and their beasts in her. But I will be an encircling wall of fire, says the Lord, and I will glory in her midst. So I don't know what Nehemiah was all worried about, because this is what the Lord that's spoken. But before we get into Daniel's 70 weeks, I wanted to read about that time period for Martin Luther. That's what we were in the business of doing when I wanted to give you the context of what Martin Luther was saying. So what's Martin Luther say about this time period? He's going to tell us what he thinks. He says, in order to understand this text, we must consult a bit of ancient history. I agree. In the first chapter of Ezra 1:2, we read that Cyrus, the first king of Persia, in the first year of his reign, permitted the Jews to be free and go to Jerusalem to build the temple, as had been foretold by the prophet Jeremiah. Uh, Jeremiah 29:10. We read that about the brides, the voice of the bride and the bridegroom. In the year, then the foundation was laid and building again. But then in this first year, then the foundation was laid and building begun. But when Cyrus went to Scythia to do battle against Queen Tomyris, he left behind Darius Hystaspes. So I strongly think that this threw me off for a long time. That because when Daniel's talking to Darius or Darius, I'm thinking that this is the same guy. Even says like the second year, I think. So I'm just like, or no, in the first year. So I'm thinking, oh yeah, 1 year before this. But what Daniel's saying is, after Babylon was destroyed in the year 530 is when Daniel's speaking, that this Darius is coming to him, who's like a commissar of Cyrus. He's Cyrus's right hand man. Like they were like Pompey and Julius Caesar. They got into war together, and then they kind of split up into better manage like multiple fronts or something. So he didn't make it as a big part of history, but supposedly he was a real guy. So that's incredibly interesting to me. So now when I read Daniel 9, I'm not thinking like, oh, this is the same year as Zechariah or something, because it's Darius, the beginning of Darius's reign. Because I no longer think this was Darius II. I think this is Darius the First. This is like the year 520. The second year of Darius is like the year 520, and it was just 530 that this other Darius and Cyrus had taken over the land of Babylon and became kings of Babylon, and that then thusly upon the first year of Cyrus, it says he made his decree. You can find this. It's not strictly to speaking about Jerusalem, but the famous decree freeing the captives. And here Martin Luther's clearly saying the rebuilding of the temple is the end of this 70 years of captivity where the land was not to be occupied. Also seen in Second Chronicles, it was like 36 and 22 or something. I don't know, but it's also in. Actually, in the original, it wasn't at the beginning of Ezra. So it is at the Ezra right now, but in the original, it wasn't. It's at the beginning of Ezra. Because the book, I don't remember. It used to make sense to me. In the first year, okay, so I'm reading Luther again. In the first year, then the foundation was laid and the building begun. But when Cyrus went to Scythia to do battle against Queen Tomiris, he left behind Darius Hypaspes. This is the Darius of Daniel, who was king. This is not what Martin Luther was necessarily saying, but that's what I'm saying. That this Darius, who was a friend of Cyrus, his partner, was who Daniel's talking to in Daniel 9, who was king with him and had helped him gain Babylon and the Chaldean Empire. Darius, however, died in the second year, and so that's probably why we didn't hear of him. And Cyrus carried the war for about 20 years until the queen slew him and cast his head into human blood and said, "Now drink the blood you two always thirsted for." I looked up this fact on Wikipedia. I didn't see this. The Weimar editor cites Luther's probable source as a story from Antonius Florentinus. Because Darius now was dead and Cyrus was at war away from home, the local officials in Judea took it upon themselves to hinder the Jews so much that they had to suppress operations and were unable to do anything during the 20 years of Cyrus. So this is before the second year of Darius. This is during the 20 years of Cyrus. So he's saying go to Ezra 4:4. It says in Ezra 4:4, thereupon the people demanded us, thereupon the people of the land set out to intimidate and dishearten the people of Judah as to keep them from building. And in verse 5, they also suborned counselors to work against them and thwart their plans during the remaining years of Cyrus, king of Persia, until the reign of Darius. So, and this is Darius, king of Persia. It's not like in Daniel, which says Darius the Mede. So that's another reason to think these are two different Dariuses. Or Darius. And when it says they had 20 years, I'm not entirely sure if Jeshua, Jeshua's here. Okay, so they got Jeshua and Zerubbabel here already. So this is sometime after the commander rebuild, because there was already a generation that came before that. And when it comes to 530 being when the decree took forth, that would mean that the invasion from Nebuchadnezzar was 600. And I think that even though 587 is the correct date, that he might have had some incursions in 600 or something like that, or his predecessor, maybe, I don't know. So I don't think, because I'm not so sure, and because I believe it was written a long time later, I would be not surprised if they just meant 70 meaning a lot, and that's what they it didn't mean necessarily 70 exactly. So however many years had gone on, where they where Nebuchadnezzar and his son ruled, and then however many years that was, I think would be more accurate than an exact 70. 70 is a nice clean number. It has significance for cultural reasons, linguistic as well as religious. So I think that's why they went with that number. And they fared as a poor, wretched people, usually fare in the hands of tyrants. And as Zechariah later confesses, Zechariah 8:10, neither was there any safety, and no one was able to do anything so badly that the warfare that God had begun through King Cyrus. So this is this is what this is what Zechariah 1 was, or Zechariah 2 was saying is, God will be their fire. They're probably pretty scared. And it's like, okay, now we're really going to go through with this. We're going to build, even though for the last 20 years we've been afraid to, because people keep on acting up around us and sending letters back and, you know, bringing up our history and this and that. So they had like 20 years, they didn't do anything. And then and like I said, Zerubbabel was there and Jeshua was there. I don't know. I do not know if Zechariah was there. Maybe his father Iddo was there. Maybe Iddo never came. Well, his father was Berechiah, but like his grandfather. But it's a similar time. I think that probably when Zechariah was prophesying, that these could have been older men, that Zerubbabel and Joshua to have been appointed by the communities and their tribes, and to be the chosen people, and then to have like 20 some years go by where nothing happens. Like they could have been a little more aged than would have been ideal. So that's maybe why the vision became so important. That, oh, he will finish the temple, and in 3.5 years they did. I'm not saying they finished it, because like Herod added to it, and of course probably Nehemiah added to it, and things like that. Like, and even there's a lot of time in between Herod and Nehemiah. Lots of things could happen. I'm sure I could probably find some places in the Book of Maccabees where something like that happened. And it says, like, after the death of Cyrus came Artakashta, and I think he's saying that's I think that's the biblical rendering of where we get Artaxerxes, because they don't have an exact transliteration. But because they don't have exact transliteration, I think the NIV is going way too far. That they think they know this is Xerxes and this is Artaxerxes. But if you compare the Xerxes in Artaxerxes and the Xerxes in Xerxes, they're not the same in Hebrew, and there's no reason to think that's who it's appointed to. In the Bible, like when they talk about the Pharaoh, they might just say Pharaoh. It's not like that. It's not. So, and these terms, these kings happen to get named their children king. So their names are what they mean. Like, so I would not put a lot of faith into anything like that. They might have just been saying king, and not even saying a name. So when it talks about Artaxerxes in Ezra 4:7, it says, well, we never read verse 6. Let's read verse 6. It says, also at the beginning of the reign of Ahasuerus, they prepared a written accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. I think that's a later insertion. I think somebody took the book of Esther and said, and this is my theory too, that Esther is actually this time period right after Cyrus, where the kings weren't known. They knew that there was probably a couple in there, but they weren't sure who they were. That's actually the original dating of Esther, I think. But nonetheless, I think that's the same name, at least in Esther. And then it says again at the time of Artaxerxes, which is Artaxerxes in in the Hebrew, Mithredath. And Mithredath is in concert with Tabeel. And if you read these letters, like the next chapter talks about another letter, which is in the time of Haggai. So it's not too long after this, because it says right here at the end of chapter 4, thus was the work on the house of God in Jerusalem halted. This inaction lasted until the second year of kings of Persia, Darius, king of Persia. So it's kind of like what we already read in verse 5 stated again. But they're saying from in that time period, a lot happened. They're saying there was a time of with Ahasuerus that we see from the book of Esther, and then there's again at the time of so-called Artaxerxes, which I'm not sure is a proper translation. So I think these are just those two kings, Cambyses and Bardia, or Guatemala, or whatever their names were, in between. They only lasted like 8 years, so it's not really important for the grand scheme of things. And this was still during the time of exile. And so he's saying that last 20 years, even though Cyrus had given the decree that lasted 20 years, people had moved there, started laying brick, but then it got stopped. And then it said, elsewhere he is called Artaxerxes, Cambyses, and Ahasuerus. So Luther's saying that, I think what Luther's saying is that this time in 6 is the same time as 7. That's just two sentences saying the same thing, basically. But the point of the second sentence is to talk about the letter that they had wrote. And Cambyses is indeed the king between Cyrus the Great and Darius the Great. So, and I think Darius the Great is who this command to go restore Jerusalem we're going to get into is coming from. And it's not Darius the first. It is Darius the first, but it's not the first time we see Darius in the Bible. This is some other friend of or brother of Cyrus, which is a Darius, according to I think what Luther is saying there. And it says, this is, I kind of am tempted to read through the rest of this paragraph. It's going to get a little confusing and convoluted. So it says, elsewhere he is Artaxerxes, convinced Ahasuerus Persis. His captain Holofernes was slain by the Jews at Bethlua through Judith. But Judith is a weird book because they're kind of taking the book of Jael and then the story of the Syrian conquest and like other kind of Jewish legends and rolling them all into one about this kind of Greek-ish guy that kind of represents Alexander the Great. So there's no reason that I ever thought that Judith was a Persian. His friend is a Persian. I should have done my homework. I'm so tempted to just read through. Oh my god, I'm already there. When he completed this plan, Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Syrians, summoned Holofernes. So 2:4 doesn't even say what he's saying. It says Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Syrians. I mean, the whole book kind of doesn't make sense. At the time, ruled over Arphashad ruled over Medes in Ecbatana. So no, I'm not. I'm not really feeling that. Um, and so this period also lasted 20 years. So Martin Luther is talking about 40 some years where they weren't really allowed to build. I don't think that's true. I don't think Artaxerxes, also known as Cambyses, ruled for 20 years. So I don't think that's true either. I think Luther ended up kicking himself about this because then he starts talking about how other people. This is like years later. He's on his deathbed and he's like, and then they want to talk about 7 weeks, and then they turn it into like 7.5 weeks. But he's about to do that same thing. Like I kind of feel like, in a way, I don't think he realized. I'll show you. Um, it says, think of it for so long as the Jews were delayed and hindered. Okay. Well, to me, that's in Daniel's 70 weeks. That would be 70 years. The first 70 years of Jeremiah's prophecy is how long they were hindered. I'm not so, but what he's basically saying, I think, is that after the 70 years begins, then you got 49 years. So you got like a half week. No, sorry, you have 1 week. But he doesn't believe in the 1 week. He ends up going on and saying how crazy his opponents are because they divide the 7 weeks from the 62 weeks. So I think he's really going to walk a lot of this back by the time he's done. So definitely treading lightly. It says, think of it, for so long as the Jews were delayed and hindered, ought they quite properly to have despaired and grown weary in their faith, since in 42 years, so that would be 6 weeks, they had no success but hindrances. Therefore, the prophets had to offer many signs and wonders at this time to comfort the people and preserve their faith in their misfortunes. Next came the third king, King Longimanus, of whom Zechariah and Haggai speak. So he is saying that this Zechariah's Darius from Ezra 6 is Darius the Great, and it's not the Darius that he talked about earlier. He called him Hypstasis, not Longimanus. And then there was a progress, and at that time the prophets arose and urged people on. For that reason, the Jews say in John 4:220 that it had taken 46 years to build the temple and Christ to raise it up in 3 days. So that to me kind of, when you get to 46 years, you're getting really close to what looks like in the first week. So in the first week of the 490 years, could it be that it took 1 week to find a Messiah? Could it be that the 62 is not included in the 7? That's why they divide it like that. And so it says from the time of the word going forth, meaning 530, you go 40 some years to 480. Then you have like 6 weeks, and then you have another 420 years or something. And so the math still is very tricky. like that doesn't really solve anything there in terms of having an exact 490 years any way you slice it to point to Jesus or the Maccabees, either one very well. So I'm leaning to it. It's not a literal 490 years. When Martin Luther and Don Preston, a lot of Christians, like the one I mentioned earlier in this video, I commented on a Christian live video. No, pastor's wrong. This was a Calvary Church, San Diego. But they'll say, yep, this year points exactly to this year where the Messiah's cut off. And they'll say it's an exact science. And they'll use Nehemiah. But we don't find Nehemiah in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And until I get to Nehemiah in this video, which I'm going to do, I would please invite you to kind of go with me on this video. Like, don't even kind of think about Nehemiah until we get to Nehemiah, because it's like a book could be added later. So if the neat thing about what I'm saying so far is you can reference this in different books, but if a book came in isolation later, that might be why Esther, they don't say too much about anybody else, because it's going to be hard to keep the facts straight when it's independent. Like we saw how easy it was to tear Judith apart. That's why I took it out of the Bible. It was meant to be allegorical, but people took it too literally. And they're like, oh, if the Bible can't be read literally, then it's not real, or like they say today. So it says, or it probably has to do with the calendars that they don't like people seeing and stuff like that. But it says, ought they not properly have despaired nor weary? So it says here that in John 2, when they said, oh, you're going to tear this temple down in 3 days and build it up, it took 46 years. Martin Luther saying this was like, okay, 7 years are over, we started building, and then 46 years we were stopped until the second year of Darius, which would, if the second year of Darius we know to be 520, that would put the decree like more like 560 something. So is Cyrus, decreeing, from a very immature spot before he had conquered anybody? Oh, I'm going to one day free the captives, or you know what I'm saying? Like, that gets tricky too. So it says, as Daniel also foretold, Daniel 9:25, in troubled times. So he's went from talking about John 2 to Daniel 9 in the matter of a couple sentences. So I'm not the only one here who thinks like that. And it says, that is, for 46 years through my hindrances, many men were active before it was completed, as Daniel foretold in Daniel 9:25, in troubled times. That's too funny. Did he really say that? During the 62 weeks it shall be built with streets and trenches in time of affliction. In trouble, so it's going to be built. So he's not saying the 6 weeks though. He's saying that this all happened during the 62 and 6 weeks potentially. So maybe he doesn't think like I do. But I don't know. I can't see, when I see like the 1 week and the 62. When I see, well, even without the 62 and 7 weeks, it starts out with 1 week, right? What's just there? No, it doesn't. So I don't know. I can't look at that and not think 49 years. 46 years is close to 49. What are the chances that that's why he broke it into 62? And Martin Luther gets weird. He'll say that's a perfectly normal way to talk. How come it says that this guy was alive for 170 years? 170, see? 170, see? It's like, dude, 170 not the same as 62 and 7. Like, get real. And so it says, for Haggai began in the 6th month in the 2nd year of Darius. And it's what it says here, began 2nd year of Darius in the 18th month. Zechariah begins his first sermon with the words, "The Lord is very angry." All right, so we read that. Let's see what the Bible says. So we got into Ezra 4, and Ezra 4 is really confusing because all of a sudden it goes to Artaxerxes, and it's like, wait, I thought Artaxerxes was the good one because he was the one that Nehemiah got permission from. So how is he going to wind up like this? Because I don't think that verse 7 is talking about what's going on in verse 12. I don't, even though I think that it's confusing. It's confusing. So maybe it is. Maybe this Artaxerxes is the one talked about in verse 7, and this is one of those kings that Martin Luther was talking about that's like Cambyses or something, who married Esther and was not favorable or something like this. Like, really, I don't really get it, but so the people in this story, Rehum and Shimshai, they're not the same people as like we see later on. So let's just, so it's quite possible this Artaxerxes is a not Artaxerxes, because Artaxerxes, remember, is the good one. So because this guy, it says right here, give orders that they stop the work. So this is somehow like during the reign of Cyrus or something like, or maybe it got bad during the reign of Cyrus and it got worse during his successor before Darius came or something. He's telling them not to build it, and so it says they stopped. And so then we go to chapter 5. It says the prophets Haggai, Zechariah began to prophesy to the Jews in Judah and Jerusalem. In Judah and Jerusalem, in the name of the God of Israel. So, and then says Zerubbabel still there, Joshua. So this is adding up with the book of Zechariah. And then it says Tatane came. So, and it says Shethar Bazane. So these aren't the same as we saw Shimshai and Rehum, but they're writing these letters, trying to get him shut down, just like those other guys did in that last chapter. And but Darius isn't buying it. Darius is saying like, well, if Cyrus said they can build it, then they can build it. And it's like, oh, good, thanks. So it says the same Sheshbazzar came and laid the foundation. So I guess Sheshbazzar was kind of like one of the first ones there, and maybe Zerubbabel is still young yet or something. But it was the decree was really issued by King Cyrus. So Darius issues a decree in chapter 6 of here in Ezra, And this memorandum says, to rebuild the temple, and they're going to need lots of bricks, and it's going to be huge. It's going to be gold and silver. So these guys are telling them, "Come on, Darius, no, not these guys." So it says that Haggai and Zechariah finished, and just for the record, they finished, 3.5 years later. So some people, I think, I've heard of putting the middle of the week in the front, but I don't know. I can't read it like that. Maybe I can. But it says they finished the building according to the command of the God of Israel and the decrees of Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes, king of Persia. So that's a little anachronistic. And in mine, it's actually in parentheses. And the scholars will say, like, if you go to the commentaries, it's like, well, yeah, there was no decree by Artaxerxes plainly. We did see something with Artaxerxes, and it wasn't very positive. So we can only conclude that this is like Nehemiah years later looking at Ezra and being like, well, also Artaxerxes too, But it says they finished building. What did they finish building? They finished building the temple. They finished building the temple according to the decrees of Cyrus, Darius, and I would put this in there, and of Artaxerxes, king of Persia. So the decree of the king of Persia at least included the temple, at least included the rebuilding of the temple, and why not include the walls? I mean, there seems to be this huge thing where these kings are well aware that though these are seditious people, supposedly, if they build the wall, if any people build the walls, then it's going to be harder to tax them and harder to get them to conform and stuff like that. They knew all this stuff. It's not like when Cyrus made his decree or when Darius made his decree that they're going to put all this gold and there's lots of people living there, but he's not going to make sure there's any security for these people, or and even when the walls were down, whatever Arabs were stuff, nobody wanted to live there. Nobody wanted to build up those walls on their own. And I don't understand why they're not working with other people. But so it says that here they are. Here's the decree of Darius, clear as day. They rebuilt it in 3.5 years after waiting, 40 years or whatever. So this very well could be in like 490 or something like that if it took 40 years from the decree. But we know the second year of Darius is not that far. So I'm thinking that the 7 years wasn't that long, and they had already started kind of like planning to come back. There wasn't like a Shabbatone River or something like keeping them there, so people had already started coming back, whenever they felt like it. They had their stuff there or whatever, And 70 is just a way to say it. Maybe it had to do with until the presence of God came back or something. So we'll get into Daniel in a minute. It gets rather confusing, but hopefully we can get somewhere today. So Ezra is in this king of Persia. So when it said like, and the king of Persia, Ezra could be under this decree. It says in chapter 7 here, it goes through his genealogy, and it only gives like 10 generations. I don't think you go back to Aaron in 10 generations from this point, but so it says the decree of Artaxerxes. So it says, it goes from Darius to Artaxerxes in actual history. No, it goes Darius, then Xerxes, and Artaxerxes. So this is like sometime later. This could have been, quite a bit later, like 60 years later, but um, nonetheless, here we have like Artaxerxes 60 years later. So where were we before? Kind of, around the year 500. No, like maybe so well, let me just tell you what they say. They say it was 458. So why don't we just say 458? So 458. Um, this is when Ezra comes on the scene, and this happens to be during the whatever year of Artaxerxes. That's how we know. And he says you can go up to Jerusalem. And he's going to give them all this convoy. It's probably like the third convoy of just like gold and stuff like that recorded. And people are supposed to give them everything on the way, empty the treasury, yada yada yada. Whatever the priest Ezra, scribe of law of God, have request you, he's saying give him everything, whatever he has. And because he's got to get there to teach them the law, is what he's basically telling them. He's saying Ezra's got to get there to teach these people the law of God. So it says, as for you, Ezra, in accordance with the wisdom of your God, which in your possession, appoint magistrates and justice to minister to all that is who know the laws of your God, instruct those who know these laws. Whoever does not obey the law. So he's like, oh, that's how I'll control this community. Kind of like a vassal. It's like, oh, yeah, this guy's up in my region, and I know him. I know Nehemiah. I'll have them go down there, and they can set up the government. And anybody's allowed to go with them. Bulls and rams, pick those up on the way, bring some with you. You're gonna have huge sacrifice once you get there. And so he goes to Jerusalem. About the first thing he does before he even reads the law is make sure to get rid of the foreign wives. That's not really what Nehemiah does. Nehemiah is more like, oh, Nehemiah's like, oh, let's recall what happened. Yeah, that's what happened. Ezra read the law. Yeah, I remember that. We were building the walls. So Ezra, right here, is told he can go back to build his temple, but we're led to believe this is the same time as Nehemiah is there to build the walls. So he's building all the walls, and then here comes Ezra to make sure that people have the law, because first it started out as kind of like an ethnic thing or something, and they didn't even have any books with them or any rules. I don't know. So lots of gold went back there by the Levites. They had Josabad by this point, Joshua's son, so it's at least a generation off. So he goes there, and um, he tore his cloak and because of the mixed marriages, and then he gets to reading the law. But really, Nehemiah is going to intersect in at some point. So Nehemiah, he's really worried about there not being any walls, even though we know what Zechariah said and um, how all these things are pointing to the prophecy of Jeremiah, and um, he's just talking about like these Arabs and Ammonites and Ashdodites, they want to make sure that the Jewish people have any walls. That's like their biggest thing, and that's what like the first like 6 chapters are all about. Him worried about not having walls, and then reason why they need walls, and so supposedly Artaxerxes is like, giving him a promise that he's going to be protected on his way over there. That he says what the deal is. He tells Artaxerxes, "I'm worried about the walls." So king would say, "Well, we need you guys now, Nehemiah. You make a good cup, but I gotta tell you, son, we're not going to have you having walls, okay?" So Ezra, according to the decrees of Artaxerxes in his book, is told to build a temple. But here's Nehemiah in chapters 1 and 2. Oh, I'm worried about I need some walls. I need some walls. I need some walls. And so I guess Sanballat and Tobiah would like sit with him, or I don't know. This is weird. This is weird. Um, like so it says right here Eliashib. So this is Ezra's high priest. So we know this is the time of Ezra. But I don't know. It's kind of reminiscent of like those weird parts of Genesis, and like I said, books of Judges and part of David's wars. Like, who are the enemies? It's like these same people that are Nehemiah's enemies, and he just seems to not be able to get along with anybody. And need to be separate and set apart. And so that's why he's like against the mixed marriages and stuff. Oh, I read in Deuteronomy 7. It says, "Thou shalt not have a Canaanite wife," and I interpret that to mean uh, an Ashdodish wife. You see, and I'll rip Boaz's hair out. So here's the intersection in chapter 8. It says Ezra reads the law. So Ezra was sent there to read the law, and he gets there to read the law. It's a little bit out of order because Nehemiah actually puts his event of the mixed marriage prohibition after this event, contrary to. So they always say like, oh, you have these 4 different gospels and say 4 different things. It's like that's how the Bible's written. The Bible's written in multiple different accounts, like all along the way. And but so here's the intersection right here. It says in my notes in this study Bible to be read after Ezra 8:36. So that's about where we were. This clause mentioning Nehemiah in verse 9 was inserted in this Ezra section after the dislocation of several parts of Ezra and Nehemiah had occurred. There's no clear evidence of a simultaneous presence of Nehemiah and Ezra in Jerusalem. Nehemiah 12:26 and 12:36 are also scribal glosses, and we should go into those. But what are they glossing? And why? I thought this was supposed to be the word of God, right? You're not supposed to alter it to. But here in Nehemiah 12, we see some interesting things. Um, we see maybe this is just my opinion. Maybe Mordecai. What else do we see? So it says Jeshua become the father of. Jeshua became the father of Joachim. Joachim became the father of Eliashib. Eliashib became the father of Joiada. Joiada became the father of Yochanan. Yochanan became the father of Judu. It says here in the notes that Jeshua the high priest of Zerubbabel was governor in the last decades of the 6th century. As it says in Haggai, he was the grandfather of Eliashib, the high priest in the early days of Nehemiah's governorship. Ezra 10, Nehemiah 3. So it's not just the gloss. I mean, it seems to be here in Ezra 10, Nehemiah 3. Eliashib, and I mean, if you just, cross-reference them, that is. In turn, when the grandfather of Jehohanan is a grown man, if not a high priest at the time of Ezra, i.e. 400 BC. They're just putting Ezra at 400 BC in these notes. Ezra 10:6 and notes. I gotta see this. What do they say? Ezra 10:6. There's no note for Ezra 10:6. Johanan, son of Elisha, actually grandson of Eliashib, the father of Johanan, was Eliashib's son, Joiada. Since Eliashib was high priest at the time of Nehemiah, and Johanan, if not yet high priest, was at least old enough to have his own separate court or chamber in the temple at the time of Ezra, it is practically certain Nehemiah's activity in Jerusalem must have preceded that of Ezra. That's funny because scholars are actually saying the exact opposite nowadays. It's been a popular theory since still the 19th century. What's this note say? The date of Ezra's journey to Palestine is not known with certainty. The 7th year of King Artaxerxes would be 458, and the present order of the text suggested that date. The narratives of Ezra and Nehemiah make it seem to many, however, that the arrival of Nehemiah in 445 BC should precede Ezra. I mean, that is a more basic reading. Like, it does seem that way, at least from the order and everything. But it says, if so, Ezra may thought to have come in 398 BC. Talk about 400 years, right? The 7th year of King Artaxerxes the second. So then we believe that just because they didn't put the second there, we might be confused. Others argue the 37th year of Artaxerxes the first, that is 428. So that's how they know who these people are and line up with them in these other like priestly bloodlines. Is if he didn't come in 458, he actually came maybe 50 years earlier. Who knows? And it says, according to Josephus, Antiquities 11:5, whose testimony here is doubtful, Judua, son of Johanan, died as an old man. About the time of Alexander the Great died. 323. If this list of post-exilic priests, at least as far as Johanan comes, as seems probable from the chronicler himself and not from later scribe, it is of prime importance for the dating of the chronicler's work in the first decade of the 4th century BC. In the first decades of the 4th, so that's like the 380s. the 380s, like, and that's pretty late. That you don't even have the 400 years anymore. When I was thinking the 400 years would be, you know, like if Zechariah is prophesying around 520, how do you get 400 years? It doesn't really add up. Seems like more like 500 years at least, right? Without prophecy, right? And so I don't know why Ezra did. I don't know why Nehemiah didn't just like you get a letter from Artaxerxes. Artaxerxes apparently is fine with him rebuilding the walls, but he doesn't have a letter, to show Sanballat and Tobiah like in the Arab, like, hey guys, turns out like I'm good. King's orders. You're calling me unloyal. Like that should have triggered them. Like, oh, you're unloyal to the king. You're building a wall. Unloyal. Wait. Oh yeah, the king. Oh yeah, he told me I could. Like, but he doesn't. That's not what he does. So Ezra's told, oh, Artaxerxes told me to build, the Artaxerxes told me to go build the temple, and he might have. Artaxerxes told me to go build the temple. The temple was completed during Darius's reign, as it says, way before. And Ezra might be as late as 400. So, like, there's like 100 years off. Like, that he's supposed to, like, oh, the temple's done, but 100 years later, God says I got to go build the temple. And, but at the same time, the same guy is telling this other guy, oh, build a city. But the guy that he told build a city doesn't seem to have any record of it. And it's not corroborated in the other book. But this is what they're basing their notion of Daniel 9 over. They're saying, well, okay, we know that we're going to ignore the fall of Jerusalem that's obviously talked about in this prophecy, and we'll just focus on the time of Jesus, and then we'll dial it back 490 years, put in a conversion factor, a scalar, and voila, puts us in the middle of so-and-so's reign. Oh, Ezra never said build the wall. He said build the temple. So here's this guy who everyone's saying came before Ezra, who's witnessing of Ezra, is on some mission to build the walls, but doesn't seem to register to Ezra. Just building the temple. And again, Nehemiah's not in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So how much, and they have Daniel, so are they basing their calculation off of the decree to rebuild Jerusalem? We read Artaxerxes and like what do you say? We'll go back. So not the first Artaxerxes, but the second one. It says, I have issued my decree that anyone in my kingdom to go to Jerusalem with you, expect to bring back silver and gold, Israel. Something about the temple slave, the singers, the gatekeepers. These aren't city rules. These are religious rules for the religious system. Not even like legal codes. The legal codes, I guess, Ezra was supposed to bring with him. And said, Right here, they finished the building. They finished the building of the temple according to the decrees of Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes. So how is it that Artaxerxes, and Nehemiah has no proof of it, is somehow the command in Daniel? So when we're reading Daniel and it's like, oh, the command to rebuild. Well, we'll take the time Jesus came and go or died and go back 490 years, and then we'll be in like this other place, and then we'll have 490 years. And then what is this? Oh, time of Artaxerxes. Oh, it does say from the command to rebuild Jerusalem. So even though they said to your friends in Jerusalem and in Judah, they said your friends in Judah, and then all those people there. Oh no, it was only until Nehemiah, and he's sometimes separate from Ezra, and um, therefore it all adds up to the exact date. We figured it all out, and nobody figured it out until now, until the last 50 years or something. So my last reading, I wanted to get to Daniel today, but time does not permit. So my last reading will be from First Esdras, and it's pretty much the same thing as as said in Ezra and Nehemiah, but I don't think they have this focus on the walls. So whether it came first or second, like if it was that part of an important part of the narrative, these walls, they do talk about the walls and how they feel threatened, but it's not like that there's this division between pre-wall and post-wall. And to set, when there's all these decrees from Darius and Cyrus, I think it's really arbitrary to say, hey, Sister Faith, oh, thank you so much. Oh, you're in Revelation? Which part you're reading in Revelation? Peace and love, Faith. I was just going to read this First Esdras, which is an Apocrypha, just for good measure. So he says that this is according to what Jeremiah said about King of Nebuchadnezzar. So that checks out. We had read that in Jeremiah. And the Lord of Israel made the Cyrus king of the Persians. So it says to King Artaxerxes, the Lord, the servant. So we saw this, and there it says, so it says if they build up the walls, they'll refuse to give tribute. And it says, O king, that if the city's built again and the walls have, there'll be no passage. And then it says, O ye men, do not excel in strength that bear rule over the sea and land, all things, but this king is mighty, for he is the Lord of all things, has dominion over them, and whatever he commandeth they do. If he bid them make war against one another, they do it. If you send them against its enemies, they go. They break down the mountains and the walls and the towers. So the king's saying, I'm not worried about a wall. I'm not worried about a wall. You tell me about a wall. I'm not worried about a wall. So your whole doctrine is based on building the walls means building the city, but building the temple doesn't. Is that what you're saying? Because that's the only decree you're talking about. And it has never been stated as an explicit decree like in Ezra. He's just saying, okay, go, yeah, okay. I mean, yeah, it was kind of an explicit decree. But it's not like Nehemiah is saying. It's not something different. It's like the same thing Darius did and Cyrus did. Maybe they don't even know who did it, so they just basically gave credit to all three of them. Who knows? So First Esdras also says in the second year of Darius. It said, then commanded King Darius among all the records of Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar in the palace of the country of Media. Why is there sitting all this gold when there's no walls? It's like, oh yeah, all these Arabs are going to rob you, and you don't have any walls, but take this gold with you, and make sure you flash it around a few times too, right? So this is still the time of Zerubbabel. Then in the 6 years when they finish it, just like it says in Ezra. In the 6th year of Darius, the king of Persia, so 3.5 years. This all kind of checks out to what we were reading before. So now he's going to be judge of all in Syria and Phoenicia. It says here in First Esdras. But make sure he's got his house in Jerusalem with walls on it, right? I don't see anything about. The king knows about the walls, but I'm just scanning real quick, make sure I'm not missing anything. Yeah, I'm not really seeing anything. It says in the 20th year of Artaxerxes. So this would be like 13 years after Ezra, the Nehemiah came. So like 20 years after Ezra. Or 17 years, I mean. But I mean, it really doesn't add up though, too, because you see Ezra chapter 8, verse 2. You have you have thousands and thousands of people, and then you have Ezra right here in verse 26 of chapter 12. When I gathered the porters, it was in the days of Joachim, son of Jesus, son of Josedek, in the days of Nehemiah, and Esdras the priest was scribe. So it tells you what time it is. It tells you the time period. It's the same time as Ezra. So why didn't Ezra know about these walls? Why is it not a thing in the whole book of Ezra? And then the book of Nehemiah even ends with a book that's talked in an event that's talked about in Ezra before it ends. Like it doesn't add up. So you know me, I don't really like talking more than an hour and a half. So I'll just make this a 2-part video. I will sign off here, and then on tomorrow, hit you with Daniel 9. When I a few more notes. We kind of had the kind of brought us up to speed with what's going on in the time period to kind of be able to figure out what's being said when we read it from sources that are related and alleged to be contemporaneous. So it should be exciting. So please tune in tomorrow. Bye. Love you.